Greetings, and welcome to this final episode of a series of short episodes on the life of David Henry White, a free black teenage sailor who was kidnapped on the high seas during the American Civil War. I'm Andrew Sillen, author of Kidnapped at Sea, the Civil War Voyage of David Henry White. In this final episode, we'll return to Captain Raphael Semmes' 1869 memoir and examine the lies he told about White, lies that robbed White of his humanity and have been repeated and propagated for over 150 years since they were first articulated. Before we look at what Semmes wrote in 1869, it's important to understand what his words became. His memoir was published, reviewed, and absorbed, largely uncontested, into the historical record. For more than 160 years, historians have cited it, biographers have repeated it, and authors have relied on it. Semmes' version of events, including his description of David Henry White, became the version of record. But it's better read as literature, fictional literature, than actual history. It became part of a broader post-war effort, later known as the Lost Cause narrative, to recast the Confederacy as honorable, restrained, and just. White left no memoir of his time at sea. He was a teenage black sailor kidnapped in wartime. His name was even omitted from the reports of the dead after the Alabama sank. And so for more than a century and a half, Semmes' lies survived in plain sight in the historical record. If you've watched other videos in this series, you've already picked out some of Semmes' lies, but let's review them one by one. The lies start with the very first sentence.
I took from on board of her the Tonawanda, one of her passengers.
White was never a passenger on the Tonawanda. He was crew. And of course, Semmes knew the difference between passenger and crew. White had a contract for his labor, and he was paid $15 a month.
This was a likely Negro lad of about 17 years of age, a slave until he was 21 under the laws of Delaware.
Under the laws of Delaware, White was free from the day he was born until the day he died. Semmes deliberately distorted Delaware law. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to consult an expert. Before his passing in 2022, Randy Holland, a former Associate Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court, an expert on Delaware constitutional law history, confirmed to me that from the standpoint of Delaware law, White was always legally free.
The slave was on his way to Europe in company with his master.
There was no master. The only master aboard the Tonawanda was the ship's master, Captain Theodore Julius, whose vessel was owned by abolitionist Quakers.
His condition was in every respect bettered.
His condition was bettered with a reduction in salary from $15 a month on the Tonawanda to $9 a month on the Alabama, and a demotion from passenger cook to boy.
He went on shore in all parts of the world, knew that the moment he touched the shore he was at liberty to depart, if he pleased.
There is no evidence that White was ever allowed on shore. On the other hand, there is ample evidence that sailors attempting desertion were regularly dragged back to the ship in irons, and they were white.
He was tampered with by sundry Yankee consuls, but always came back to us.
From consul reports in Singapore, it's clear that American consuls could get nowhere near the Alabama because it was docked behind locked gates to prevent desertion. Later in the memoir, Semmes describes the sinking of the Alabama and the rescue efforts that proceeded.
We now turned all our exertions toward saving the wounded, and such of the boys of the ship who were unable to swim.
But as we saw in the last episode, the record shows that Semmes escaped on a vessel that rescued no boys, left the scene a full half an hour before the last man was saved, and destroyed a lifeboat as it fled. Over the course of these episodes, we've read ship's logs, consul reports, payroll records, court documents, and contemporary newspaper accounts from archives in multiple countries. Piece by piece, the documentary record tells a very different story from Semmes' fictional account. There's much more to learn about this story, and you will find it in my book. But the larger lesson extends beyond one ship and one war, and for that matter, one sailor. White's story is not peripheral to American history. It's part of it. This sordid tale of kidnapping, torture, terror, isolation, and depredation should not be shuffled aside to the periphery of our collective American memory. On the contrary, White's story is deeply intertwined with the political, economic, and racial conflicts that defined the Civil War and that continue to shape American life. Semmes' memoir, and those of his officers, John McIntosh Kell and Arthur Sinclair, are classic examples of lost cause literature, a determined effort by Confederate veterans to frame the rebellion as a legal and just war in which secession and Southern wartime activity were defended and uniquely characterized by honor, civility, and virtue, while minimizing the horrors of slavery. An enduring trope of that mythology, inherited from the antebellum era, is that of the loyal or contented servant. By 1939, that trope was vividly embedded in American popular culture in the deeply flawed film extravaganza Gone with the Wind, based on Margaret Mitchell's 1936 novel. When power is threatened, it often turns to monument building and to narrative storytelling that preserves honor, redirects blame, and reshapes memory. It's a process of both addition and subtraction. These distortions simplify, sanitize, or reframe events in ways that serve contemporary purposes. We continue to see similar struggles over public memory today. What could be taught? Whose histories are legitimate? And which paths are worthy of preservation? The assault on Black, Latino, Native American, and LGBTQ history, that is to say, the assault on American history, is no longer sporadic but systematic, no longer the whim of individuals, but the policy of government. Today's controversies, the erasure of history, the false stolen election claims, and revisionist downplaying of the January 6th insurrection, remind us how rapidly political myth-making can take hold. In this way, the present informs the past. Both the stolen election and the lost cause are fictional narratives consciously and deliberately constructed as weapons to animate reactionary forces. Just as investigators and journalists have sought to expose all the lies about 2020, so too we must question the invented foundation of American memory. While not conventionally heroic, White's life is significant because it belies the racist narrative his captors sought to construct. History is not only about what happened, it's about who gets to describe what happened and who gets erased. Thank you for listening, and if you believe this story deserves a wider audience, please hit like and subscribe, and look forward to a bonus episode.